10. Now, let me begin by saying that this is the winning Torah portion. What do I mean by the winning Torah portion? If there was a competition between all the Torah portions as to which Torah portion contains the most commandments, this Torah portion would be the winner, because there are 74 commandments in this week's Torah portion. So we know there are 613 commandments, 248 of them are positive, 365 are negative, meaning thou shalt not. Even if you look in the 10 commandments, you'll see that the majority of them are negative commandments, things you should not do. The whole second column is negative, you shall not do. And on the first column, 2 out of the 5 are. So 7 out of the 10, which is 70% of the 10 commandments, are things you should avoid doing. Only 3 of them are positive on the first tablet: faith in one God, I am the Lord your God, honor your father and mother, and keep the day of Shabbat holy. But 365 negative, 248 positive, which tells you that the word no in life is even more important than the word yes. Sometimes, or most of the times, knowing how to say no is more important. If you're going to master one word, the word no is probably the best word to master to have a good, productive life. Having said that, which takes us into the subject of a great book called Essentialism, which talks about how every yes is a no and every no is a yes. If I say yes to something, I'm excluding something else at the same time. If I say no to something, I'm saying yes to something else. So, for example, if someone says, can I meet you at a certain time, but you're supposed to be doing something else at that time. So you may think you're saying yes to this person, but you're saying no to what you were supposed to do, whether it was to study or to be with your family or whatever it may be. But be that as it may, what I'm trying to say really is that there are 613 commandments. There are 53 Torah portions. Now, if you do the math, each Torah portion should have about a dozen commandments. Yet there are some commandment portions that have no commandments, like the stories in Genesis. Some of them have no commandments. And then you have the big Torah portions, or the biggest, like this week's Torah portion, has 74 different commandments. So obviously in less than an hour, we're not going to cover 74 commandments, but maybe we could touch upon some of the array of commandments. And obviously each commandment carries with it a whole principle and perspective on us, an entire subject that the commandment touches upon. So there's so much to be gleaned from each individual commandment. So what is the first commandment in the Torah portion? It talks about love versus lust. Now, they're both 4-letter words, love and lust. But not only are they different, they're actually the opposite. As someone once said, love is about giving, lust is about taking. Love is about someone else, lust is about yourself. So the Torah talks about a Jewish soldier who goes to battle. That's the name of the Torah portion, Teitzei, when you go to war, and you see in the enemy camp a beautiful woman. This is known as the law, believe it or not, the law of the beautiful woman. What is the law of the beautiful woman? You see a beautiful woman on the battlefield, meaning in the enemy territory. Now, you may wonder, what's the woman doing on the battlefield? And the answer is that actually, sometimes the enemies would send out the beautiful women to entice the soldiers, to weaken their resolve and bring them over to the enemy camp, so to speak. But this man captures this woman. And the Torah uses the word v'chashakta ba. Now, we all know the word for love in Hebrew is ahava. The Torah doesn't say you love her. V'ahavta ota, you loved her. No, the Torah says you desire her. Desire. You are lusting for her. You are obsessed with her beauty, because obviously you saw her on the battlefield. She's not Jewish. You haven't spoken 2 words to her. You have nothing in common with her. It's just that you physically are attracted to her. And we all know in war, there's lots of terrible things that happen in war. And one of them is things along this nature. We don't have to get very explicit, between soldiers and women in the enemy camp, and horrible things that happen. But here the Torah says, we know that the man's drive is very, very intense. So this is a very unique commandment, because in most cases, the Torah will tell us it's forbidden. You cannot lay a hand on her. You cannot be intimate with her. You cannot have her. That's forbidden, right? It's obvious you're not allowed to violate this woman, and so on and so forth. But here the Torah gives us an interesting formula or prescription about what the soldier shall do. And Rashi says it very clearly. Rashi says this commandment is God addressing the Yetzer Hara. The Yetzer Hara is that animalistic drive in man. We all have a godly soul that yearns for lofty, idealistic, sublime, spiritual goodness, righteousness, connection to God. We all have that part. We also have a part of us that's very much bestial and wants all the physical pleasures and cravings of the body and the desires of the heart. So what do? So if I tell you don't eat pork and ham, okay, it's doable, you could control yourself. I tell you don't work on Shabbat, okay, it's hard, but you can do it, But if I tell you you're on the battlefield, there's this beautiful woman, you want her, and no, you can't have her. Now we know there was a famous person in the Torah, Joseph, when he was in his master's house, his master tried to seduce him and he ripped himself out of her grip and fled. But you know what? He's called Joseph the Tzaddik till this day, Joseph the Righteous, because that super righteous power to be with the master of your house's wife alone, and she's desiring you, and you're a slave, and you have a chance. And by the way, you have to understand, on a battlefield, you're alone. You're seeing life and death in front of you. Soldiers are dying all around. Like your moral strength is very much diminished in such a set of circumstances, because you're more than ever craving some feeling of connection or wholesomeness or physical pleasure, whatever it is, because very rough circumstances. Same thing like Joseph. He's a slave in Egypt. He's far away from home, like the soldier who's on the battlefield. He could be with his master's wife. She wants him. But he has the moral conviction to say no to her, even at his own consequences, that he was imprisoned later for that. So the Torah says, and this is quite interesting because the Torah is a book that is a realistic book. Judaism wasn't written for angels. Torah wasn't written for angels, written for human beings. And God knows our human condition with all of our struggles and our temptations. I think it was Oscar Wilde who once said, I could resist anything in life except temptation, right? Temptation is very real. And some temptations are easier to resist than others, but some are really hard. And we know the Talmud said thousands of years ago, Ein apotropos larayos, which in Aramaic means you can't follow any normal calculations and expectations when it comes to sexuality. It's like when it comes to sexuality, all bets are off. People will act in the most surprising, unexpected way when it comes to that area of arayot. Arayot means sexual intimacy. And that's why you see throughout history, I don't have to tell you, even amongst great Jewish people like King David with Bathsheba, and surely in today's modern day and age, every day there's, terrible stories of people who did terrible things. We had the Me Too movement, women, office places, whatever. It's like, and we hear about who these men were. And by the way, it could be the vice versa. Joseph, it was the opposite case. It was a woman seducing a man. It doesn't always have to be the man. But the point is that very, very distinguished, respectable, or otherwise refined characters with morals and ethics, suddenly when it comes to this area of sexuality, they become, terrible. I mean, I don't have to tell you all the people who are sitting in prison, people like, I don't have to list their names, but famous people, actors, actresses, politicians, every category. And it's not just in America, Israel, any country. There's a president of Israel who sat in jail for something along these lines. They say, what do you mean? He's such an accomplished person. But that's the human nature. When it comes to this area, it's one of the most difficult struggles. And that's why Jewish law has a lot of laws about not even being alone in a room with a woman behind closed doors. You have to be very careful and so on and so forth. Having said all of that, what does the Torah say to do? The Torah says, we say to the soldier, listen, we'll make a deal with you. Imagine God saying, let's make a deal. You could either have this woman illegally right now, violate her, God forbid, or I'll give you a legal path to marry her in a proper kosher way. And again, because there's 74 commandments, we won't get too deep into them because we don't want to spend all the time on one commandment, but that's why you come to Shul on Shabbos to hear the rest of the story. Basically, the Torah tells the soldier, take her home and wait 30 days. And you have to take off the beautiful clothes of captivity that she was wearing, because again, the enemy would send out the beautiful women to engage the men. So let her wear, drabby clothes, and shave her hair so she doesn't look so physically attractive, and let her nails get undone or grow long. And she's going to cry, I want to go home, I miss my family. And after 30 days, the Torah is hoping you'll come to your senses and you'll stop lusting for her, and you realize, I'm not attracted to this woman anymore. I've seen the other side. It's not just like a fleeing, I saw her in the battlefield and she was gorgeous, whatever. No, go home. And you'll let her go and you won't have to be engaged with her. But if you want her after 30 days, you could marry her. She has to convert, but then you could take her as a wife. And the Torah is sort of making a gamble that hopefully he'll let her go after 30 days and not want her anymore. But by telling him, slow down, don't, we'll give you a legal way to marry her properly, as long as you don't engage now with her illegally. But to tell him don't engage, it's going to be too difficult. But what's very interesting about this commandment as well is that the next commandment in the Torah portion talks about a man who has two wives. And the Torah says a scenario, he loves one wife and he despises the other wife. Okay, could happen. A man loves one wife, and in those days there are two wives or more, he despises one. But the one that gave him his firstborn son is from the woman that he despises. And the question is, he doesn't love that woman. So he doesn't want to give the special double portion to the firstborn of the despised woman. He prefers to pass over that son and give it to the woman that he loves, his son. So the Torah says no. The laws of inheritance have to be followed. You cannot exclude the son of the woman you hate just because you hate his mother. Doesn't mean that you could pass him over for his portion of inheritance, his double portion, and you have to follow the laws of inheritance. And even though you love the other woman, you have to give the child of the woman you don't love the double portion. And incidentally, the third story in the Torah portion is about a rebellious and a wayward child. And the rabbis say basically that these are three sequential stories. First, you marry a woman for the wrong reason. Then you end up despising her. Then you end up having a wayward child. In other words, always think of the long-term implications, repercussions of your deeds. Maybe this will feel good in the moment. Maybe this will be pleasurable. Maybe this will be make you happy at the moment. But think of the long-term happiness or lack of it that you will have as a result of this decision. Always weigh the outcome, see the future. And a person who could, the Pirkei Avot says, who's a wise person? One who can see what will be born. And we use the verb see, because the point is, a lot of people understand the outcome, but if you could see it, if you could visualize it, really grasp, if I make this decision now, maybe I'm going to enjoy this right now, but think about how many people in life, sadly, just focused on the momentary gain, the momentary benefits, the momentary indulgent pleasure, or whatever it was, and paid a price tragically, and many others in their lives had to pay a terrible price for years and years to come, sometimes permanently. So never let the moment blind you to the consequences of the future. And that's what the Torah is trying to tell the soldier. Yeah, you may think this woman is good for you right now. We understand that. You have an animal soul, you have a Yetzer Hara, but try to think about the outcome, what kind of marriage you're going to have, what kind of children you're going to have, so on and so forth. And that's what we try to tell people till today. One of the big problems we are facing in the Jewish community, of course, is intermarriage. And the numbers are extremely high. I don't have to tell you how disappointing it is. Some 70-something% of Jewish kids, obviously in the Orthodox community, the numbers are very, very different. But when you step outside of Orthodox community, in the general community where kids are not leading a fully observant life, the numbers are very, very high of intermarriage. And it's a very hard area to tell a child, don't marry the girl of your dreams or the guy of your dreams because of religion. But one of the things we try to say to them is, don't just think about this moment. Think about your future, your generations, your children, your grandchildren. Will they be Jewish? How are you going to feel, in 13 years from now when your kid, is not interested in having a bar mitzvah because, whatever, one parent isn't Jewish and whatever it may be. And as a rabbi, trust me, I deal with that, when the bar mitzvah comes along and the parents have to deal with, the consequences of the decision they made when they got married. And they were, so passionate and infatuated with each other. And now, who knows, maybe things have changed. So that's the message of the opening story of the Torah portion. Let's move on to the story of inheritance again. So love and lust, we could all relate to it. It's a commandment that we could all apply to our daily lives. And it doesn't only have to be about love and lust. It'd be all decisions where there's a, momentary pleasure with a long-term negative consequences, or vice versa. I have a deficit right now, and I have to go through something difficult and painful, but think about all the long-term benefits. Now we talk about the laws of inheritance, and again, as a rabbi, I can tell you this is a very practical commandment. Many times, and this is again in the Torah as well. It's not just in modern day. When it comes to issues of inheritance, there could be preferences that parents have for one child over another. And we have that throughout the book of Bereshit. Jacob favored Joseph over all the other kids. The whole story of Jacob and Esau, Rivka wanted one child to be the inheritor. Her husband Isaac wanted the other child, Esau. But in modern times, you have the same situation. If you have multiple children, and maybe for whatever reason you feel one child is more suited, more deserving, more capable, it could be a whole list of reasons, and you want this child to be the one who succeeds you or, inherits whatever role or position that you have, or to become the executor of the will or whatever it may be. To run the family business or whatever it may be. And the question is, do you have to, hey, this is what I want. It's my money. I can give it to whoever I want to give it to. And again, this is another thing that as a rabbi, I see a lot, unfortunately, where parents die sometimes, and there could be a lot of acrimony and strife in a family over inheritance issues and rivalries about money and possessions and things like that. And it's heartbreaking to see. But sometimes the parents chose a certain child over the other children to receive more, to be in a better position financially or whatever it may be. And, sometimes I'm able to speak to the parents, so, when before they pass, to guide them on it, but sometimes it's too late. And I've seen, I'm sure maybe in your life, stories of a lot of pain amongst the siblings, and the children feel very hurt because it's not just about the money. It's like, why did my parent favor that child over me to give this child so much more than they gave me, or so on and so forth. So again, the beauty of the Torah is it's a 300-year-old it's a 3,300-year-old document from Hashem that God gave us through Moshe Rabbeinu. But as you read it, you see it's so relevant to our daily lives. And what the Torah basically says is, yes, you as a parent, on the one hand, you can say, it's my money, I earned it, I can give it to whoever I want to give it to. It's my choice, it's my right. But at the same time, the Torah says, no, not so fast. Yes, you have individual autonomy and rights to your money and to give it to whom you please. But on the other hand, you also have to make decisions based on your family structure and the implications and the repercussions and the effects it's going to have on the other members of your family, and the devastation and the hurt and the pain and the rejection that the other children will feel, which will trickle down to future generations. And I've seen this, unfortunately, where as a result of siblings fighting over inheritances, the grandchildren don't talk to each other either now. So, and it's very sad because I think sometimes I say, I knew these parents sometimes, and it's like they work so hard to accumulate all this. They would have all known that all this is going to cause. So therefore, I always say, it's not about me. The Torah always says you have to be fair. You have to treat everyone equal. You should never show favoritism for one child over the other. Now, this is a different kind of a scenario because a man has two different wives. And by the way, I mentioned the story about Joseph being favored by Jacob. Why was Joseph favored over his older brothers? Because he was the son of Rachel, who Jacob loved more than Leah, that he didn't love. So this law is mimicking or an addendum to the narrative of the story of Joseph marrying two wives, one he loved, one he didn't as much, and loving one child over the other. And we saw the consequences. The brothers threw Joseph in a pit, which led to the slavery, which led to all sorts of sufferings. So the Torah is trying to warn us not to make these mistakes again. And even though you feel you really want to give one child more than the other, look at the broader picture and the consequences it will have on the other siblings and family members, and don't make that mistake. Treat all the siblings equally and fairly, regardless of whatever other considerations or motivations you may have. I'm not going to reveal who, not because it's not really important, but a certain person, and maybe this is more common than I thought, but a certain person shared with me that their parents have a certain amount of, accumulated a certain amount of wealth or assets, and they basically called all their kids to their lawyer's office to a meeting, and they said, children, the one thing we want is that you should always love each other and be there for each other. We never want anything between you. And so we're going to show you with the lawyers present exactly how we drew up our will. And if we try to do it as fairly as we thought, but we want you to all know right now what we decided. So if you feel something's not right, let's discuss it right now, and we'll change it in the will right now. And we'll make sure that everyone signs off, that everyone's in 100% agreement. And the person told me it was a very moving experience because they saw their parents' love and commitment to them. They want everyone to be equally happy. This family happened to have 4 children. And surprisingly, because of the circumstances, 3 of the siblings felt that one of the siblings maybe didn't get as much as they should have gotten. Said, well, this child didn't receive this during their lifetime, so maybe they willfully gave up part of their inheritance to give that 4th child even more under the circumstances. So the parents walked away, everyone walked away happy, and the parents were like, not only didn't the kids complain about the way things were going to go, but they were looking out for each other and saying, no, give more to this child because they deserve even more under their particular circumstances. And that's really, a good example of how to make sure that these issues don't creep into a relationship. Let's move on to, again, there's 74 laws, so we're just going to do as many as we can do. There's a law following the rebellious child, and the rebellious child is another very complicated story, but in this short class we can't get into everything, but the Torah talks about preventive damage. Like we all know there's something called tough love, that sometimes you have to show your child, God forbid nobody should know from this, but again, as a rabbi, I deal with a lot of families, so I see things, but sometimes people have children who are out of control, young teenagers who are just a danger to themselves and a danger to society. They could be suicidal, they could be on drugs, they could be this, and they have to send them away. Especially in Utah, there are programs, wilderness programs, where they could take the kid against their will and force them into a rehabilitation program. It's extremely painful for the parents, for the child, but they do it for the child's future best interest, because parents have a responsibility to the best of their ability to raise good children. And sometimes parents are faced with a child that's no fault of their own. This child is just a very troubled, demonized, I don't know if that's the right word, but they have a lot of destructive voices inside of them, anger, depression, whatever it is, and they're fearful that this child could do something very harmful to themselves or to others, and so they have to deal with this child in a way that is very difficult for them and for the child, but it's the only way to save the child for themselves, and that this child doesn't grow up to become, God forbid, a danger or do something better. They should deal with it now and suffer the pain of having to, put their child in a program like this or whatever it may be, then God forbid, getting a call one day that something tragic happened. And then again, we see in our society stories of shootings in public schools where you see teenagers where the parent tragically, horrifically gets a call that your child just killed X amount of people because the child didn't get the help. And again, it's very hard. A parent loves the child. You want to protect your child. You want to be there for your child. It's very hard to turn your child over to authorities and say, my child needs to be sent to an institution. My child needs to be locked up. They're a danger. They're a threat. But again, these are very, very real practical issues that we see in 2022. They still haven't changed. We're still facing the same human dilemmas and moral and emotional struggles and challenges that the Torah talks about 3,000 years ago. But now we come to another Jewish tradition that's touched upon in this week's Torah portion, which is, we know that in Jewish burial, I actually just got this little booklet in the mail the other day, and I'm looking into getting it at our synagogue. It's called There Is Life. It's a little booklet that talks about, God forbid, when someone loses a loved one, what are the stages of going through, God forbid, someone suddenly loses a loved one. They have to deal with so many different issues, grieving, but also the planning the funeral and everything else. And one of the things in this book that we all know in Jewish tradition is that we try to have the funeral as soon as possible. So some people, sometimes in Israel or in certain communities, a person could die in the morning and the funeral could be that afternoon. But as we know, in Jewish burial, we try to do it as soon as possible. And the reason we try to do it as soon as possible roots back to this week's Torah portion. This week's Torah portion tells us that when someone dies, the person's corpse, the person's body should not lay overnight. So ideally, you want to do it on the same day. In Jerusalem, they never allow a body to stay overnight. That's why in Jerusalem, I don't know if you ever experienced this, but I did. There are funerals sometimes in the middle of the cemetery, 11 o'clock at night, midnight, because they don't let people stay overnight. Now, it ties back to this, and there's a beautiful Rashi that brings a medrash that explains it, that there was once a king whose brother died. His brother was actually a criminal. He was put to death. And that's the scenario here. But that makes the parable even stronger. So the king had a twin brother, and the brother was put to death. And now people saw the brother's corpse hanging on the gallows. And people were saying, that's the king, because it looks like the king. He's a twin. So the king said, bury him right away, because it's a disgrace for me. So too, says the Medrash, that every person is in the image of God. So when a person dies, the corpse is in the image of God, but now it's missing the soul. So God says, give the person the dignity and the honor to not lie in that position, but to be buried as soon as possible. So that's the Jewish tradition, to bury someone as soon as possible, which also roots to this week's Torah portion. Now we come to chapter 22 in the book of Devarim and Parshas Teitzei. And here we come to a very practical commandment. And I'm sure everyone was on one side or the other of this commandment and could appreciate the beauty and the goodness of this commandment. And it's known as the commandment of returning lost objects. Unlike what you were taught in nursery school or in preschool, finders, keepers, losers, weepers, the Torah says there's a mitzvah, a biblical positive commandment to return a lost object to its owner. Not just an object like a wallet or a watch that you could just easily pick up and put away till you find the owner. But even if you find their ox or their sheep or their donkey, you got to be busy taking care of this guy's donkey and his sheep and his ox till you find the owner of the animal. And if there's shearings of the sheep, till you find the owner, you got to hold on to those shearings and give it to him back with the sheep. So in today's modern time, you find a stray dog, stray cat. We actually had a story the other week. I was out of town actually, but my kids showed me a video. Some little puppy ended up in our backyard, and my kids found it and played with it, and then found the number on the tag and called the owner, and the owner was so grateful the dog got away, right? But imagine if you couldn't find the dog's owner for a week. We would have to watch that dog and feed it and go out and buy dog food to take care of the dog. So, and the Torah says you can't turn a blind eye. You may see this animal and say, I'm not even looking at it. I don't want to see it. I don't want to pretend I never saw it. I don't want to be responsible. And if you've ever been in a situation where you lost something and someone else made the effort to find you, you know how grateful you are. On the other hand, if you ever had the privilege of finding something and returning it, you know what a joy it is to return something to the rightful owner. And it happens all the times. I mean, we all have stories. We have stories being in taxis in Israel, leaving things, and then the guy coming back to return it. And we're like, couldn't believe our good luck. I just had a story. And when we were in Portugal, my tefillin fell off the thing, and some person returned it to the security guard. It was the happiest moment of my whole trip because I had my tefillin and my passports and everything. So it's a very simple mitzvah, but such a crucial mitzvah. And again, it's another example of where in our society, if for some reason we tell kids, finders, keepers, losers, weepers. But in Jewish law, not only is there a commandment, there's a whole tractate in the Talmud. You may know this, called Baba Metzia. And it's not a small tractate. It's like over 100 pages with hundreds and hundreds of laws of returning lost objects. Now, obviously, in this class, we can't get into hundreds of laws, but to give you a little sampling of what these laws look like. So here we're going to get a little bit legalistic and Talmudic here, just to give you a flavor. So the Talmud says, let's look at this verse. The verse says, if you see the ox of your brother, or his sheep, or his garment, or his ox, sheep, donkey, or garment, you should return it to him. Or any other object of your fellow man, you should return it to him. Okay, so the Talmud asks a very simple question. The verse says, so shall you do to any lost object. So the question is, why did the Torah have to give 4 examples? The ox, the sheep, the donkey, or the garment? Could have just said, any object you find, return, period. If you want to give examples, why give these 4 examples? You could give hundreds of examples. You found his iPhone, you found his car keys, you found his watch, you found, there's a million things. You found his umbrella, you found his sweatshirt, we could go on and on. Why these 4? So the Talmud goes and explains every detail. The sheep, as I told you, for the shearings. That's lesson number 1. If there's something that the animal gives off, the ox, even for the shearings of the tail. You may think, it's just the shearings of the tail. No, you have to return that too. The donkey, listen to this. The Talmud says, what happens if the guy says, let's go to the garment first. What does the garment teach you? That a garment has identification marks. So you don't have to just give it to the first guy who comes along and says, I lost the wallet. First of all, it may not be the real owner. It may be a dishonest person trying to get a free wallet. So you have to say, prove it was your wallet. Tell me what kind of credit cards they were in it. Tell me how much money was in it, right? Wallet's easy because usually has your name on items in it. But let's say somebody finds a watch. I find a Rolex. It's a valuable watch. Someone said, I lost the Rolex. So you announce, I found the Rolex watch, or I found the watch. The guy, I lost the watch. What kind of watch is it? It was a Rolex. Okay. What kind of Rolex? What color was the dial? And then if the guy gives you what's called simanim, signs, there was a scratch on the glass, there was a crack over here, so the same thing, a garment is something that usually has an identification. I could tell you it's my garment. I know about it. I could tell you the label. I could tell you the brand. I could tell you this. I could give you specifics to prove it's mine. And that's one of the major laws of So what's if something does not have a siman? And this is an interesting law. You find $100 bill in the street. So you put up an announcement. I found $100 bill. A guy comes along and says, I lost $100. Well, how's he supposed to prove it? Every $100 bill looks the same. You find oranges in the street. There are 5 oranges sprawled outside Publix. Somebody had a hole in their bag and oranges fell out. I found oranges. How am I going to prove it's my oranges? All oranges look the same, right? So believe it or not, if there's no siman, you don't have to return it, because how do you know who the real owner is? Now, if the oranges were piled up in a certain formation, or the money was arranged in a certain way, or if the dollar bill was folded in a specific way, that's a different story. There's a way to prove it. But the point is, the garment teaches you have to be able to show that it was your garment. That's number 3. And what about the donkey? Says the Talmud, what happens if the guy comes along and says, I could prove it was my donkey? How could you prove it's your donkey? The saddle on the donkey has my name on it, or has this inscription on it, or this engraving on it. So you may say, well, a minute, okay, I know the saddle is yours. You prove it's your saddle, but all donkeys, they look the same. How are you going to prove it's your donkey? So the Talmud says, no, if you could prove it's his saddle, since the saddle was on that, you found it with the donkey, you assume that it's his saddle, it's his donkey too. You don't assume that he took a different donkey and put a saddle on it or something like that. So I'm just showing you how every detail, that's why there's a whole tractate about lost objects. But the amount, when a child starts learning in yeshiva in 5th grade, 6th grade, all the laws of finding a lost object, how to find the owner. As you know, in Jerusalem, there was a special stone where all the people who came to be Ola Regel, which is the people who came for the pilgrimages, would come. If you found something or lost something, it was like the big lost and found. Right? When you go somewhere and you lose something, the first thing is you call the hotel or you call the place. Do you have a lost and found, right? So in Jerusalem, Jews came from all over Israel to be Ola Regel for Passover, Shavuos, Sukkot. So you came to a certain stone, and announcements were made, and you had to announce on 3 consecutive holidays that you found something. And if nobody claimed it after 3 holidays, then you can keep it. But there are a lot of laws about making sure you return lost objects. Now, if you want to get deeper and more spiritual, and this is many of the commentaries talk about this, is that just like I have to return your garment, I find your jacket, I find your coat, I find your sweater, I find your dog, I find your watch, I have to return it, right? What happens if there's an expression, sometimes people say, this person, he's really lost. Or sometimes people will say about themselves, I need to go find myself. So sometimes we use the term lost, not about objects, but about people. A lost person means a person who's lost their direction, lost their purpose in life, lost their motivation, let's say, right? So if I have to return, if there's a mitzvah to return your physical garment, how much more is the mitzvah to return a person to themselves? So if you see a person lost their way from Judaism, they're not connected to Judaism. Can you imagine what a mitzvah is to return the Jew to Judaism? To bring him back to the synagogue, to bring him back to a Torah class, to bring him back to a Shabbos table, to bring him back to his own soul, and to bring him back to his Father in heaven. Imagine a child's lost. God forbid, in Florida, we have Amber Alerts when a child's missing. What could be a greater joy than to bring a child back to their parent? So if you see a child who's estranged from their parent, God forbid, and you can return the child to the parent by making a relationship between the child and the parent. Imagine the greatest form of returning something lost, or returning a Jew to their Father in heaven by bringing them back to Judaism, or somebody who's disturbed in some other ways, and you get them help. Person has challenges, you get them a therapist, you get them mental professional, or they have other problems. The point is, don't just think of it in terms of an object. Yeah, that's the most simple, practical thing. But there are many other forms of helping people who are lost find their path. Person may have lost their way financially, and you could help them financially find their way back. So there's so many ways to do this mitzvah. And if you want to get one step further, Hasidic masters say that if these four things represent, three animals represent three personalities. The ox is a very aggressive animal. Represents a person who's very aggressive, unrestrained person. Sometimes people, their struggle is that they have no restraint. They're like a bull as they say, a bull in a china closet, right? That's their struggle. Other people are like the sheep. The sheep is very passive, very meek, very timid. Some people, they don't have a sense of self. They're so insecure. They're like the sheep. Then there are people who are like the donkey. Donkey is very obstinate, very stubborn. They're unmoved. They can't be changed. They can't be inspired. They're just stuck in their ways, stubborn, like a stubborn ass, right? So the different animals represent different struggles. A garment, the word beged also means boged, which means treachery. The word beged is not just about clothing, because clothing cover your body. But then there are people who cut. Just like clothing could fake, but you could see a person could look like a very respectable, distinguished, honorable, religious person. On the inside, they could be a crook, a criminal, a horrible person. So the clothing could disguise who you really are. So clothing could be hypocritical. They could hide your true character. You could present you to be something you're not. So there are certain people who are like the garment, the lost garment, meaning they're living a world of falsehood, of deception, of faking, of treachery, of pretending to be something they're not. I heard this story. It's not so funny, but it makes a good point. This guy tells his friend, the olden days, they had the cars with the odometers. This guy tells his friend, I'm trying to sell my car, but it has 150,000 miles. Nobody wants to buy it. So he says, oh, my cousin's a mechanic. He knows how to turn back the dials. He wasn't an honest person, unfortunately. He says, okay, good. He went to his cousin. He went behind the thing. He turned it back to 15,000 miles. He meets his friend a few weeks later. He says, did you go to my cousin? He said, yeah. He said, did he turn back the odometer? He said, yeah, he turned it back to 15,000 miles. He says, so now you sold your car? He said, no. He said, why not? He said, why would I sell a car that only has 15,000 miles? So sometimes you live a life of lying where you stop not only lying to others, you're lying to yourself. You're not even aware of who you really pretending to be that you're not. So all of these different animals and situations, the garment, represent different struggles of personality, deficiencies and flaws that people could have, that you could help a person. The greatest mitzvah you can do is help a person find their true self, get back to their good character and away from these negative different traits. So that's another major subject in this week's Torah portion. Again, I'm going to try to cover as many of the 74 commandments as possible. My battery is running a little low, so I'm going to see here if I could charge it while we learn, so we don't run out of battery in the next 10 minutes. By the way, if anyone have any questions or comments, feel free to text it to me. I'll be happy to address any questions that you may have. Another subject in this week's Torah portion is I talked about it this morning in the video, seeing your friend's donkey collapsing under the weight. You should help them reload their donkey. And, I said in the video this morning, it's like seeing someone with a flat tire. But here's a deep psychological insight the rabbis give us. At the end of the verse, it says, load shall you reload the donkey with him. And the rabbis say, what does it mean with him? Now, rabbis say, what's if the friend is lazy and he doesn't want to reload his own donkey? And he's like, okay, go ahead, do a mitzvah, reload my donkey. But I'm going to sit here and watch you do it. Then you no longer have a mitzvah to load the donkey. In other words, the mitzvah to help others is when they're doing the best they can to help themselves, but they need your help, so you help them. But we all know in life there are situations, somebody comes and says, oh, I don't have money. Can you help me? Of course, it's a mitzvah. I'm happy to help you, but tell me, do you have a job? I don't want to get a job. So now you're like, should I help him? So we all know there's a concept of an enabler. An enabler is somebody who is teaching someone else dependency. because you're basically saying it's okay that you don't have a job. You'll just get supported from friends and family and others, community and charity. If a person's working as hard as they can't make a living, or they can't find a job, of course you should help them. That's the mitzvah of tzedakah, absolutely. But a person can't be bothered to get out of bed and go get a job, and they expect you to help them, then you're not helping them, you're hurting them. And therefore the Torah says, reload the donkey with him. If he's doing his part, then you should help him. If not, not. Now, the commandments of the Torah are very diverse. They're all commandments. Moshe is telling the Jews, when you go into the land of Israel, these are all the things you should do. But it doesn't necessarily follow in any sequence. There's different categories of commandments. And one of the categories in this week's Torah portion is, believe it or not, the welfare of animals. So if anyone on the Zoom class here that loves animals, that has pets, you'll be very happy to know that the Torah, of course, is very, very concerned not just with human well-being, but animals' well-being. And we know that from the laws of Shabbat. The Torah says, you shall rest, your employees shall rest, your servants shall rest, and your animals must rest. Animals need a day of rest. So we know you're not allowed to, God forbid, cause pain or inflict pain on an animal. We know that animals have to get a day of rest, but perhaps this commandment takes it to the highest level. And that is that we have to be concerned about the emotional pain of an animal. And here the Torah says, yes, the Torah says if you come upon a bird's nest and you want to take the chicks, you cannot take the chicks away from the mother. You have to send away the mother bird, and then you can take the chicks, because you don't want to cause the mother the pain of you taking her children from her. So you have to worry about the emotional, not just physical pain of an animal. And it's not the only commandment in this week's Torah portion about animal welfare. There's some very powerful ones, like the one a little further down the page here that says you should not plow a field with an ox and a donkey together. Why? The simple basic reason, although there's many, many reasons given, is the ox is much more powerful than the donkey. And therefore, it's not fair for the donkey to be harnessed together with the ox to keep up with the strength of the ox. So therefore, it's cruel to put the donkey together with the ox. But another beautiful interpretation given by one of the commentaries is that it's an emotional pain, not even a physical pain. And listen to this. You know, we human beings suffer one of the emotional sins or struggles or pains that we feel is the pain of jealousy. You know, looking at what someone else has, and it causes you emotional distress that someone else has something you don't have that you would like. It's obviously wrong. The Torah says you should not covet the neighbor's possessions. It's commandment number 10 in the 10 commandments. And it's obviously for your own benefit not to covet other people's possessions. And it says in Pirkei Avot, there are three things that drive a person out of the world. One is lust, as we discussed earlier. One is the pursuit of honor, and one is jealousy. What about animals? Can animals feel jealousy? So there's one interpretation that says that one of the difference between an ox and a donkey is that one chews its cud and one doesn't. The ox chews its cud, the donkey doesn't. And therefore, that's why the donkey is not kosher. And therefore, when you plow the ox and the donkey together, the ox is constantly eating because it keeps on bringing up food from its stomach. It has different stomachs and eating it over and over and over again. So throughout the field, as they're plowing, the donkey sees the ox is eating constantly. And the donkey doesn't have what to eat. He already ate lunch back in the barn, but he's not eating in the field. And he's looking at this ox who he's working alongside and thinking, look at how much this guy is getting to eat. He got more food than me. And he's jealous of the ox. And therefore the Torah says, don't put the donkey and the ox together because we don't want the donkey to feel that jealousy. So again, all the moral implications of this are fascinating. The first one is, don't expect two people with different skill sets or strengths to do the same work. You know, sometimes parents could expect two children to do the same thing, or a teacher could expect two students to do the same thing. Or a boss could expect two workers to do the same thing. Well, one may be an ox, one may be a donkey, metaphorically. One may have much greater strengths and powers and abilities. So to force all the children to get A's, maybe one child's capable of an A and one child's only capable of a B. It's not fair to expect them all to do the same. And I hate to say this, but the school year is starting now all over the world, at least in this part of the world. That's what happens in most schools. Okay, kids, here's the tests. Those who get an A are going to be on the honor roll. Those who don't get an A are not going to be on the honor roll. Well, there's some kid in the class who unfortunately is not as bright as the rest of the kids. And the kid is trying really, really hard. He's doing his homework. He's paying attention. He's taking notes. He's doing the best he can. But every day when he goes in the hallway, his name is never on the honor roll. Why? Because we're expecting everyone to be like each other. We're plowing with the ox and the donkey together. And I'm not going to tell the school how to do their schooling, but the real way it really should work is whoever puts in equal amount of good effort gets on the honor roll. Because that everyone could put in the same amount of effort. But to say that the kid who has a lower IQ should get the same mark as the kids who have the higher IQs is just not fair to that kid. And that kid is being punished in a way because they always have to see their name missing from the honor roll. They can never tell their parents, Mommy, Daddy, I'm on the honor roll, because we're treating. So if we have to be sensitive to an animal, how much more so do we have to be sensitive? How much more so to human beings, especially to children? Same thing with the jealousy thing. Another terrible expression we have in our society is people say, if you got it, flaunt it. The Torah says just the opposite. Why would you want to make someone else jealous of you? We're human beings. We see things that other people have, and it could make us jealous. Of course, if you have things, you have it, but be modest about it. Don't try to. Flaunting means you want to show off. You want people to be envious of you. Why would you want to cause somebody emotional anguish? Okay. And it doesn't just mean materialistic things. It could be other things. If you go on and on telling somebody how wonderful your children are, well, maybe this person doesn't have children. Maybe this person doesn't have children that give him nachas. Or how wonderful my wife is, or my husband, or, like, who says you have to announce that to the whole world? Yeah, of course you want to tell the right people, but don't do things to make other people jealous. The Torah is even concerned about the animal's emotional jealousy and feelings. You shouldn't be jealous, but that doesn't mean the other person shouldn't be jealous, but it doesn't mean you have to incite that jealousy by flaunting what you have, but rather you should be modest about the blessings that you have in your life. So that is another whole category of commandments about compassion for animals. Like I said, we didn't even scratch the surface, but we have 2 more minutes just to touch on one more thought. We talked about jealousy. The Torah does also talk about hatred, and this is a very good subject. Basically, the Torah says, do not hate. We all know there's a commandment, love your neighbor as yourself. There's also a commandment, do not hate. In what context does the Torah say it? Do not hate an Egyptian. Now, why would you want to hate an Egyptian? Well, I have a lot of reasons to hate it. They enslaved our ancestors in Egypt. They drowned our babies in the Nile. They persecuted us. Torah says, don't hate them. You know why? You were guests in their country. When you arrived during the time of famine to the land of Israel, they hosted you. And then the Torah says, do not hate the Torah then says, do not hate a Adomi. Adomi is Edom. Esau was the brother of Jacob. Edomites. Rome became the descendants. Why? Because they're your brothers. And the Torah is basically saying is, just like with jealousy, why should you not be jealous? First of all, you shouldn't be jealous because be grateful for your blessings. Don't look at what other people have. It robs you of enjoyment of what you have. Everyone has their blessings. Everyone has their struggles. You don't know the other person's life. So it doesn't even make sense to be jealous, really. Also, God created you and God gave you what you need. Someone said you're never jealous of someone else's prescription glasses because that's your prescription, not mine. It wouldn't work for my eyes. Well, your life is for you. My life is for me. But when you're jealous, you suffer the most, not the other person you're jealous of. He doesn't even know you're jealous of him. You're the one suffering. The same thing is true with hatred. People say, how could I forgive somebody who did some really bad things to me, unforgivable things. Yom Kippur is coming. Why should I forgive another person? And one simple reason is because, as someone said, hatred is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. When you drink the poison, you're going to die. So carrying hatred is poison for your soul. And therefore the Torah says, do not hate even an Egyptian. And it's interesting that Jews are not haters. We believe in justice. As I mentioned yesterday, it was the 50th anniversary of the Munich attacks, and there was a special hit team that made sure to kill all those terrorists who were responsible for the deaths of the 11 Israelis murdered in Munich in 1972 on September 5th. However, hatred we don't carry. If you've ever met Holocaust survivors, it's remarkable that the Nazis murdered their families, their parents, their siblings, the worst, their children sometimes, right? But they move ahead with their lives with love. Of course, we believe in justice, and we bring terrorists and we bring Nazis to trial, and we make sure they get what they deserve. Eichmann was hanged in Israel. For sure, we have to obliterate evil. But for us to become a hateful, vengeful people, that is our own destruction. And we find that other races and other minorities that become adopt a victim mentality, where they focus entirely on their victimhood, that is their own destruction. The miracle of the Jewish people is this commandment that God told us from day one. The Egyptians did terrible things to you, but don't hate them, because hate is never a response. And when you think about Jewish history, there were, in every generation, nations that did us harm and killed us and harmed us and tried to annihilate us. And who could think of anything worse than the Holocaust? But yet, when you think of Jews, think of all the Jews right? We tend to be a happy bunch of people. We're always coming together, l'chaim, we're celebrating life, we're happy, we're joyous, we're celebrating. It's like very funny in a way, we come to shul, we read the whole Torah portion of the Egyptians, and they threw our babies in the Nile, and they drowned us, and they whipped us, and back-breaking labor. And then we finish the Torah, and we go to the Kiddush, l'chaim! What are you l'chaim? We should walk around depressed that Shabbos. Did you hear what we heard in the Torah portion of the Egyptians? Yeah, we know what happened. We have to learn from the past. But let's go on and live. Let's celebrate life. Let's have l'chaim. We're not going to sit here and cry. We have to live. We have a moment now. We can make this moment happy. We can make this moment productive. What are we going to sit around and cry about what happened in the past? We have to always learn it over and over. Every year we read the Torah, but we never stop forgetting. As a matter of fact, in this week's Torah portion, at the end, we're going to read about Amalek, who tried to wipe out the Jews, the first war the Jews had when they left Egypt. Remember Amalek, blot out the memory of Amalek. Always remember to uproot the evil doers. For sure, we have to learn there's Amaleks in the world, like Iran and Hamas and Hezbollah and all these terrorists who want to destroy us. You got to be aware of that. But then go to the Kiddush and celebrate Shabbat and be happy. And that's the secret. How do we do that? Because the Torah says hate is never an answer. Hate is not a response. You know why? Because hate doesn't do anything. All it does is it destroys you. It makes you an angry, hateful, resentful person. So Joseph, he forgave his brothers. Why is he such a hero? Because he says, what does Joseph say to his brothers? The best, who am I to say the best line in the Torah, God forbid. But one of the lines that I love more than any other line in the Torah is when Joseph's brothers say, oh my gosh, this is our brother Joseph. Now he's the viceroy. And they think he's going to clobber them and punish them. And they're afraid of him. And he says such beautiful words. He says, don't be afraid of me. Everything's good. Don't be sad. Don't be depressed. You know why? Atem chashaftem alay l'ra. You had bad intentions. You threw me in a pit. You sold me into slavery. You had pretty bad plans. But Elokim chashava l'tova. God had good plans for me. You were busy trying to hurt me. God was busy making me viceroy of Egypt. So you don't have to feel bad. And we as a Jewish nation very much follow that mentality of Joseph and the commandment, do not hate. We say, listen, we have too many good things to be busy with in our lives. We have no time for hatred. We're too busy thanking God for all our blessings. We're too busy being grateful to be busy feeling sorry for ourselves, or we're going to go out and celebrate life. We're going to say l'chaim. We're going to be joyous. We're going to learn from the past. for sure. We're never going to stop forgetting. Every year Passover, we have a Seder to remember what the Egyptians did to us. We forget, we remember like no other people remember. But emotionally, we go forward. We don't carry hatred because, like I said, hatred is like drinking poison and expecting your enemy to die because you drank the poison. So we maybe covered a dozen of the 74 commandments. So I hope to see everyone Shabbat when we'll be able to delve deeper into everything that we began today. Wishing everyone a great week. Tomorrow, there's a special speaker. Check your email. Our Lunch and Learn is having someone from the Begin Sadat Center at Bar Ilan University. A guest is coming to town. Let us know you're coming so we can prepare lunch. 12 to 1 tomorrow at Palm Beach Synagogue. Next week, we're also having on Monday, Jason Greenblatt, who worked on the Abraham Accords, is speaking 7 p.m. next week. So we have some great events coming up and look forward to seeing everyone. Thank you all for joining and have a wonderful day and welcome back, Red. Pablo. All the best. Bye.